Hello, everyone. I'm Umberto Chacon, and welcome to Conversations Under the Canopy. Today, we'll be talking about mental health support and response training with our guest, Jackie Moore. First, a little housekeeping. This is being recorded, and if there are time for questions, we'll put those at the end, and please put them in the chat. After the webinar, there will be a survey and a follow-up email with the deck. I'm a former HR leader in Silicon Valley with a master's in HR and organization development, who has been working with the Canopy team the last couple of years as an account and business development executive. And Conversations is a series of short sessions where we speak with Canopy and industry experts to help us learn about services and customer success stories and gain actionable insights in the world of employee well-being, engagement, and performance. Our guest is Jackie Moore. She's an experienced counselor and senior trainer here at Canopy. Jackie has a master's in social work and many years of clinical training experience. She is the creator of Mental Health Support and Response, a training designed to provide education and resources to positively influence workplace mental health and organizational culture. Jackie currently provides therapy to individuals, families, couples, and facilitates a wide range of seminars for Canopy. In this conversation, Jackie will tell us more about this training. So welcome, Jackie.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first, can you tell us a little bit about the impact of mental health issues that you've seen in the workplace? What's happening out there?
Definitely. So although obviously there's a lot of pros and cons to the past few years, but one of the pros that I will say is that there has been a big increase in awareness and proactiveness towards mental health issues in the workplace. Right? We've really started to recognize that these two things are not siloed; they are not separate entities. We don't suddenly not have mental health when we go to work. Right? That this is something that we really want to be aware of and address. And from an organizational standpoint, the mental health issues have a pretty significant impact kind of across the board. And that ranges widely, right? So from sort of that more business-oriented side, there's some pretty substantial financial impacts. This estimated as a multi-billion-dollar cost on the United States every year, just addressing mental health-related issues. So there is a financial impact, of course, but this, again, ranges and it goes across the other side of the spectrum, which is, then we see, retention rates are impacted. We see hostile work environments, just general poor well-being and quality of life for employees.
Right. Okay. And can you tell us a bit about this training that you designed?
Absolutely. I would love to talk about my little baby, right? My little training here. Yes. So mental health support and response is an 8-hour training, which I do appreciate is very long. It's a lot of information, a long time. But one of the things we do like to point out is it does not have to be done all in 8 hours at once. We can divide the training up over multiple days because, of course, we do appreciate it's a very big ask to ask people to take 8 hours from their day. So it is an 8-hour training. Now, within that training, there, I would argue, are kind of 3 core components sort of broken down. So the first is actually going to be learning about mental health, this psychoeducation piece. This is not stuff that's frequently talked about. One of my favorite questions to actually ask groups is, can I have a show of hands of who took a mental health class in middle school or high school? And I will tell you, I do not get a lot of hands, right? That is not something that is generally taught. And so we do a good amount of just basic education there in terms of, what is an anxiety disorder? What is depression? Right? What's trauma? What's substance use? Now, part of that also is going to be the second component of stigma reduction in order to help make mental health support and intervention more accessible to folks, and recognizing sort of the normalcy, right? That mental health issues are prevalent. They're part of the United States. They're part of every country. It's, of course, not specific to the US, but that the stigma is actually what perpetuates, right, these mental health issues. So I would say that's that second component. And then third, of course, there is this huge component, as you would hope and probably guess, which is really about intervention. So how do I have a conversation with somebody I am concerned about? What is some language we want to be keeping in mind? Right? We will talk a little bit, of course, about some crisis de-escalation, some body language, things like that. And then additionally, now this isn't necessarily for every single training, but we do have an additional sort of addended component of the training that is available for specifically leaders in the workplace. So folks who are in some position of leadership, management, supervisor, whatever it might be. Because we do recognize that folks in leadership are going to have a slightly different role when it comes to mental health issues in the workplace than folks who are not in leadership. So we want to provide some additional support, additional information about leaders' roles in terms of facilitating company culture, modeling behaviors, of course, that communication and language component, and certainly overall how you can help be a link to resources. So definitely say those are probably the three biggest pieces. And then once you've completed the full 8 hours, there is a certification as well that is offered for folks who complete.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. And can you tell us, what is a mental health disorder?
Absolutely. So I have up here, right, of course, the American Psychiatry Association's definition, which is very, very wordy, very academic, right? Significant changes in thinking, emotion, or behavior that leads to distress or problems functioning in social work or family activities. I do, again, appreciate that's wordy. So the way I break it down is there's three main components to a mental health disorder. One is changes in the way you think, feel, or behave. Two is it disrupts your ability to go to work or go to school, right? Whatever, is going on. And then third is it really impacts your ability to have relationships with other people, which is a really fundamental component of human well-being.
Okay, thank you. And what kind of issues are covered in the training?
So we cover quite a bit. I would say we cover all of the most prominent issues in the United States specifically. So we do talk about anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and then panic attacks is going to be kind of included in that, and especially in terms of how to respond to a panic attack in the moment. We do spend a pretty decent amount of time talking about suicide, suicidal ideation, which of course is a really important issue, very prominent in the United States, certainly incredibly relevant. We also do talk a bit about trauma, which I think is really just important to have a baseline of that to understand most other mental health issues. And we do also touch on briefly psychosis and psychotic disorders. Now that is a space that we don't spend too much time, but it is a very deeply stigmatized part of mental health, and also an area where a lot of folks don't have information because it's not something we talk about a lot. So psychosis and psychotic disorders are touched on. And then we finish up actually talking about substance use disorders, which is, according to the CDC, one of the most prominent impacts in the workplace. So we do spend a pretty decent amount of time talking about substance use too.
Okay. And can you give us some examples of kind of signs in some of the different topics?
Absolutely. So, of course, for this training, we are kind of coming at it from a workplace perspective. Of course, this will apply elsewhere too, but kind of keeping in that workplace setting mode. One thing I like to point out for anxiety is that for many folks, anxiety actually manifests through sort of irritation, irritability, impatience, short-temperedness, right? Folks maybe not having quite as much tolerance for things that they would have had previously. And frequently we kind of identify that as irritability, but for a lot of folks, that is actually a secondary emotion, and that primary emotion is actually anxiety. Additionally, the one I always like to point out is, especially in the workplace setting, we do see a lot of folks experiencing sort of this imposter syndrome, which is sort of a branch of anxiety. And imposter syndrome just being, how did I trick all of these people into believing I could do this job, right? How did I get here, in this call? I don't know how they all got fooled, right? Which of course is going to have a really big impact on confidence, competence, and of course feeling grounded in your role.
Right. Okay. How about depression?
Definitely. So depression, I really like to point out here on this one, especially the changes that we've seen in the last few years where folks have moved more into a hybrid or a remote model, and we don't have quite as much, one-on-one access, right, to folks as we used to. And depression is one of those mental health issues that I think can really creep in those spaces because of that isolation and social withdrawal. I say this jokingly. I say this in a lot of my trainings. Folks have maybe even heard me say this before, but it is a joke, but it's also true, which is that humans are very much herd animals. We are supposed to be around other people, right? We create families and communities for a reason. And so when we start isolating and withdrawing, these are some pretty big indicators of mental health distress. You'll probably see that across the board. Additionally, though, with depression, we do see changes in personal appearance. That can be changes in terms of sleep and food, but also in terms of hygiene, right? Folks maybe not maintaining the same expectations or standards for themselves that they have previously.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And how about substance use disorder?
Definitely. So like I mentioned before, right, this is a pretty prominent issue in the workforce. It's definitely something that we want to be aware of course, too, because there's some risks if folks are going to be, under the influence at work. And there are certain professions that are at slightly higher risks for substance use. For example, legal, construction, restaurant hospitality, things like that. Those types of professions do tend to have slightly higher rates of substance use. But that being said, one of the biggest things that we really see there, of course, is things like absenteeism, right? So people calling out very frequently a lot, or maybe coming into work late or leaving work early, not being quite as present and as quite as productive as folks maybe used to be. And certainly we also might see some changes in appearance or other things that we might notice. For example, I've had a lot of folks mention, being able to smell alcohol on somebody, something like that, which of course would be an indicator as well too.
Okay. And how about suicide ideation?
Definitely. So this is a very important one, definitely one that we spend a pretty good amount of time on, for good reason, of course. The one that I really like to talk about, and has actually come up quite frequently throughout the course of these trainings, I've heard this several times now, is folks having employees make comments or jokes or just statements about wanting to kill themselves, about death or dying, some variation of that, right? And of course, when we hear things like that, I think most folks' instinct is to kind of, wait, what did you just say? What does that mean? And this has created really good opportunity for folks to reflect on what do we do when those things come up? What is our policy? What is our plan? What is our, expectation for how we potentially intervene? But, talking about death, dying, suicide, making jokes about it, these are always going to be warning signs and indicators. I really like to highlight here that folks who are doing very well mentally are not going to be making jokes or comments about death or dying. And we do want to take that seriously and really note that as a potential indicator.
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you for all these examples and giving us a idea of what the training is about. Do want to mention to folks that if they want to do a deeper dive, if they want to go through the course, we do have an open enrollment session on May 24th. And when we send out the follow-up, we'll add a link to that registration page. So take a look and see if we have any questions in the chat. And I actually don't see any, so it's great. Thank you, Jackie, for all the information and for putting this together and doing so much to help with mental health in the workplace. And everyone, our next session is going to be on financial coaching with our partner Balance, and that'll be on July 20th. So look for the announcements about that. And with that, thank you so much, everyone. Until next time, be well.
Thank you.